Okay, so we are going to start in Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. And my plan is to do a long haul session today. So get your popcorn and your adult beverages prepared there because we're going to cover some verses here and do some serious digging. And hopefully, we'll get a chance to blow your guys' mind also. So, chapter 5, verse 13 says something to the effect. Read along. Remember, get your Bible out. Don't just listen. Ye are the salt of the earth, but if the salt have lost its savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and to be trodden under foot of men. We've probably all heard these verses, right? So the first image here is salt. So why does Yeshua use the metaphor of salt? To answer this, you have to ask yourself, what was the purpose of salt in ancient times? And it technically still could be today, but back then it was primarily a preservative, right? They didn't put salt on things for taste like we do, right? Maybe we could put some Himalayan sea salt on our food today for taste, but for them, it wasn't about the taste. It was about the preservation of the meat or the food, right? Why?
No refrigeration.
They had no refrigeration. That's correct. 1,000 rabbi bucks to Brian there. So, do you guys remember the Salt Wars? Dun 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 dun. Dun. So the Salt Wars, the ancients literally had wars over salt mines. Okay. So, what was the purpose for the salt wars in ancient times? Whoever controlled the salt controlled the ability for an army to move.
What's salt have to do with armies moving?
It seems odd, right? Because an army really only has two choices: live off the land you conquer, or bring the supplies with you. Bringing the supplies with you requires a huge logistical army in and of itself. More men, more stuff, right? And you wanted all those men as warriors up front on the lines killing other people. So today, we go off to fight in Persian Gulf One or the Iraq War or something like that. And when we do this, we may send in, a bunch of Marine troops or something to get it started, or we might drop a tank division somewhere. But in the meantime, spooling up over here in the States and in Europe, we've got thousands of people working in logistics to back up all the other people we're sending over there, right? We got C4, C5 Galaxies dropping all of this equipment over into the Persian Gulf, which is a logistical nightmare for the Air Force. But beyond that, you need all of the personal gear for every infantry soldier on the ground. So we've developed huge machines today to do this. In fact, if we were to go to like the green zone in Iraq today, you would find that they have cargo containers that and tents that they have turned into Pizza Huts and Little Caesars and all sorts of common fast food restaurants. Right? We just take the whole restaurant, airlift it over there, plop it down in the green zone, and they can get their food. That was not the way of the ancient Near East. So when you don't have refrigeration, you use and need salt. And if you don't have salt, your army doesn't go very far. The regions with the salt mines were then highly valued. And Roman soldiers were paid with salt because it was so valuable. And this is where we get the phrase, that guy's not worth his salt. And the salt from the seashore has lots of funky stuff in it. So it was unusable to them. Where today we drop in the military would have a movable desalinization plant. We just pop it on the seashore, put a bunch of guards around it, and you got all the water you need. Not so in the ancient Near East. Of course, the Dead Sea is filled with salt, but it's not sodium chloride, table salt, right? NaCl. It's potassium chloride. And today, we have high-tech processes of desalinization where we can get that salt out that they didn't have. They needed salt mines. So now let's get the metaphor. You are the salt of the earth. What does that mean? You are valuable. To do what? To preserve. So we think that we're supposed to be out there doing good things. And yeah, that's true, but for what reason? What's the why? To preserve the earth. You literally act as a preservative for the physical world. So how does that fit into a Hebrew Bible image or a metaphor? Think about the process of preserving the earth. What does Yah go through in preserving the earth? Yah has a stake in the earth. So he does not just allow his creation to deteriorate. He had planned for it. In fact, the purpose of Israel is to attract the nations to God so that the earth might be restored. We're in this giant process of restoration. If you go back to Genesis, 10, the list of nations, Israel was not listed as a nation. Remember, nation is Gentiles, right? Israel was the priesthood. Israel was to bring light to the nations. Israel was to act as the preservative on the earth so that all of those Gentile nations would look at it and want to be like it. Think about the flood. That is a picture, the flood is a picture of Yah preserving the earth. The idea of preservation of the earth continues over and over and over again in Scripture. It is not that we're going to all wait it out until a new earth shows up, the taxi doors open, and then we hop on the new earth. And we'll just get rid of that old one and everything will be hunky-dory. There is a reason that we are here, and that is to be the preservative. So let's look at what it says. You are to be the salt of the earth. You are in the preservation business. If I asked you for a list of things that you do that preserve Yah's image in the earth, what would you put on your list?
Well, taking care of the land, taking care of animals, growing the garden, keeping the trees and things like they're supposed to be, keeping the weeds out.
Where did you
taking care
learn?
of his
Where did you learn
animals.
that? How do you know that?
Just
I'm not saying it's wrong. I just want to know, how do we know? You said preserve the land. How do we do that? How do we know?
I don't know, I just do it.
But why do you do it?
It must be innate. Innate, I think.
Are there commandments in Scripture to take care of the land?
Yes. Yes. God gave us dominion and asked us to take care of the earth. In Genesis
Absolutely.
1.
Absolutely. Okay. And we went over the last few weeks, we went over a bunch of those land laws and how those land laws were designed to perpetuate life on the earth, right?
Mhm.
Even when there are wars, there were laws about how to take care of the land.
Don't cut all the fruit trees, etc.
Exactly. Okay. So, um, so the commandments of God, the observance of Torah, every one of those commandments is designed to act, when I do them correctly, to act as a preservative on the earth. Now, let's move it to the context of Matthew's book that we're reading here, the gospel. Just a few verses back, about a month ago, we read a whole series of statements about how to be a preservative in the earth. What are those statements called?
The Beatitudes.
The Beatitudes, okay? That's specifically what he's pointing to here. It talked about being pure in heart and being peacemakers and all those things that we talked about in the Beatitudes. Those are all the characteristics of those people preserving the earth. Why? Because they reflect the character and the image of God. Do they physically look like him in the mirror? No. They reflect the functional image of God. They act like God if he were here. So, whenever you act in a way that honors God, you bring preservation to the earth. So, let's, one of the things I always like to do with Torah, let's reverse engineer that thought. What happens when you do not act that way?
Everything breaks.
You are worthless salt and it all breaks down. That's correct. Okay. It is salt, but it doesn't do what it's supposed to be doing. I mean, like, again, so let's take that and apply it towards, end times. There are more famines in the earth. There are more earthquakes going on. There are all sorts of illnesses going on. Why is that? The preservative isn't acting the way it's supposed to act.
Well, and if salt isn't used as a preservative, it can be used to kill as well.
You bet. You bet. So, if it does not have the characteristic of saltiness, the characteristic that I need to preserve meat so it won't rot, it has lost its value. And the world is just rotting away now. So just throw it out on the road, trample on it, it's as good as dirt. So the metaphor is, as long as we are acting in ways that preserve God's righteous ways in the earth, we are restoring the world to Yah's image. And when we do not act that way, when we lose the ability to preserve Yah's image in the world, then we have lost our purpose or function for living. We now have no value. So you, he says, you are the salt of the earth. And the more observant you are of his instructions, the saltier you are to the world. The more you act as a preservative. All right, so image number 2 now that he talks about. You are light. You are the light of the world. 14a. Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. Not only are you the preservative, but you are also the light of the world. So why does he say misspelling there? It's on a hill. Why does he say a light on a hill can't be hid?
Because everybody can see.
Yeah,
the light on the
everybody
hill.
can see it. It's up high on a hill, right? So everybody in every direction can see it. It is not that people in the village are enjoying the electric lights, but the town can be seen in a dark world from everywhere up on the hill. Wherever you stand, you can look and see that light over there.
Yeah, it draws your eye.
And that, of course, is the exact purpose of Yisrael. God creates Yisrael, a nation unto himself, a nation, a royal priesthood, he calls it, for one purpose only, to be a light to the world. Why? So the people in the dark can see the light and come to it. I mean, do we not know this from Sukkot? Do we not sit at Sukkot and bugs come all around us when there's lights there in the evening?
Oh yeah, they're drawn to it.
They're drawn to the light, right? So now we don't see that a lot in scripture because they didn't do their job. Israel didn't do its job. They were the ones who lost the ability to preserve. They were not salt. And they were acting like the world. Give me 1 second to fix a word there. So Yah takes them to task repeatedly. Remember, good kings, bad kings, good kings, bad kings, good kings, bad kings, in both houses, okay? Because they weren't acting like preservatives. They weren't acting like light. Secondly, they built cities on the hill and then they put shrouds over the top so people couldn't see. I'm not talking literal shrouds for those who are the literalists among us. The shrouds were the takanot and the ma'asim, the additions and subtractions and community standards that they built around all of these commandments that prevented them from seeing their own Messiah when he showed up. There was such a thick shroud of this junk, this oral law that was over the Torah itself. They could not see the Son of God walking one step in front of them. I should say many could. God gave us Torah so that we can protect ourselves and the Gentiles can go to hell, right? Isn't that what the gospel says? No, everybody
I
says,
don't think so.
everybody says heaven forbid, like Paul, right? The Torah is for us and not for them, I thought.
I'm pretty sure that's not what it says.
Yeah, absolutely. The reason we have the Torah is so the Gentiles will be punished, right?
Pretty sure that's not what it says.
Pretty sure, I mean, I've heard this in churches, I'm getting out of here at the rapture and the rest of them can fry and die. Because that's what the Bible says, right?
Pretty sure it's
Look at
not.
the person, the verse number there.
Yeah. Second Opinions 3:12.
There you go.
So Yeshua says, you guys don't get it. The reason you have the Torah is so that you can be light and attract the world to you. That was God's original intention. And by the way, that's why the world needs to get back to his original intention. So where does it say in Torah, I have chosen you for this purpose to be a light on the hill? Where are my Torah scholars here? My Exodus Book of Shemot scholars. And it's the very first thing that it says in Shemot. It says, I am making a covenant with you this day. You are a chosen people, a holy nation, a royal priesthood. And what was the purpose of choosing an entire nation and making them all priests? Did the whole nation of Israel, did they need priests for themselves?
Yeah.
Well, but they had a group of priests for themselves, right? The Levites and the Kohanim.
Mm-hmm.
Did they need the nation to be priests for themselves?
No.
No, they had priests. The Levites, even the Levites had priests. The Kohanim, even the Kohanim had a priest. The high priest, they got priests coming out of their ears. The reason the nation was supposed to be priests was because they were to be a light unto the world and a preservative unto the world. It's not that we become Levites. We can't become Levites.
Unless you are.
Unless you were born into it, right? So the whole nation is also to act as priests for the Gentile nations, the Goyim, us. And
Used to be us.
yeah. And recall that they said when you go back to Deuteronomy, right? When this all happened, they said, yeah, we'll sign up at the registration desk at Mount Sinai. Sign me up for this. I'll be a light to the world. I'll follow this set of commandments that they're not doing, and that makes me a priest. It doesn't make me a Levitical priest, but it makes me a priest to the nations because they're not doing what God said. Our job is to call people to Torah obedience so others can find out. And we do that through our lifestyle of living God's instructions. For Israelites, not for Levites, not for the high priest. And it wasn't even so much about teaching. Remember in Devarim, Deuteronomy 28, it said, if you just do all these things, do them, not teach them. If you just do them and live the way I say, the other nations will say, we want some of that action. That looks pretty good to me, what they got going on over there. Those guys, they've got these sun lamps or something, and looks pretty cool. We want to be part of that. We want sun lamps.
We want to go to that party.
We want to be part of that party, you bet.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're living in the dark and they need sun lamps. And all of a sudden you walk into their life and they're like, hey, wow, turn it down. It's a little bright. He tells them, I will prosper you. I will bless you. And others will say, what a great God they serve. Look at what he does for them. And they'll come. You literally don't have to take one step out of your door. Just live the way I want you to, and they will come. But the Israelites lost their salt. Remember, when Yeshua is saying this, right? We're in Matthew chapter 5 here, okay? Sermon on the Mount, right? When Yeshua is saying this, he is speaking right to the very people. He is in their face now. Y'all have lost your salt. Y'all are not acting like the priesthood that you were called to. Not the Levitical priesthood, not the Kohanim, not the Kohen Hagadol, not the Melchizedek priesthood. Remember what he said just before this. The verses we're talking about at the very end of the Beatitudes. We're talking about you will be persecuted for my sake, right? So I'm calling you to a wonderful life, right? And here's how you can, Joel Osteen would say it this way, here's how you can have your best life now. Sign up. Your life is going to get worse. People will persecute you. You will eventually have a reward that you do not know. There are no guarantees anything good is going to happen to you. And that is how you sign up for the best life now. He's telling us we must count the cost of stepping out of the world system. Does Ecclesiastes not say the same thing? A wise general will count the cost before going to war. Matthew 5, 11, and 12, he says, count the cost. People will be hostile to you. They will be hostile to Israel. Not everyone is going to sign up. Not everyone will say, that light on the hill looks so wonderful. Others are going to say, ooh, a light on the hill. What a perfect target. That's really easy to hit in the dark. They lit it up for us. Some people are going to have enmity and be filled with violence and vengeance towards you. Why? Because you've been called to be a preservative, which means you call people to Yah's way. And not everyone will like to be called to Yah's way. And you are a light on the hill, which attracts people to God, and not everyone wants that. Although this last week, I was teaching, I don't know if I was teaching on this section or the next section in Matthew, during one of my after hours talks on Facebook. And this guy comes on, it was one of my black belts, maybe like 30 years ago in the karate school. And we've always been friends on Facebook. And he comes on and I forget exactly what the verse was that we were talking about. And he writes this little paragraph on there and he says, this is why I like you so much, Albert, because you actually tell the truth about what the Bible says. Now, this is an atheist, right? Okay. And what I had said is, I mentioned something like about Christmas or Easter or something like that. These are just, things that men made up. They're not in the Bible and stuff. So he says, this is why I like you. You're far better than like the preachers and teachers on TV or on the radio or something like that, because they tell lies all the time. And this is the thing you got to get. Atheists aren't dumb. They've actually read the Bible and they know what it says. And when someone says a lie, they go, these guys are liars.
Yeah.
So I actually have now the atheists on my side. All I did was tell the truth, and the atheists are all of a sudden agreeing with me. How great is that? Great. Even the atheists are attracted to the light. So it doesn't mean that you will not see Yah's blessing, but understand the standards of Yah's blessings are not the standards of this world. He doesn't say you won't have enemies. He says he'll make a table for you in the midst of them. He doesn't say he's going to take them away. It does not mean that you will have 14 Rolls Royces parked in their driveway. You don't have enough room for 14 Rolls Royces anyway. So you may not be the one at peace, but you will be the peacemaker. Remember, when we studied the Beatitude about being the peacemaker is the guy standing in the middle and both sides are shooting at him. So you get arrows from everybody. Whoopee. But you will be the one who shows mercy. Not necessarily gets mercy. And as James Yaakov later points out, count it all joy, brothers, when you encounter various trials. So it's not circumstantial happiness. Sure, you are happy with the $1 million in the bank, but you're also afraid because why? Well, I could lose that all tomorrow. Just give the stock market another week.
Yeah, no doubt.
But Yaakov and Shaul are not going to let you steal their joy. Throw them in prison, shipwreck them, scourge them. Great. So he knows that he is working for a longer term goal than this one. Yah is going to bless me or do whatever he wants to make sure the attraction people need to see that the attraction people need to see is present. So is Shaul used as a light on the hill? Absolutely. Does that mean he has a wonderful, fabulous life? Well, maybe not from the average, Roman's perspective, getting scourged every few weeks or something like that. But in terms of where he's going, absolutely. But from the observation of those in the world, you'd have to say, man, Shaul really took a beating. But guess what? Yah was using that beating to bring people into the kingdom. It's a win. Sometimes Yah uses a guy like Solomon. Sometimes Yah uses a guy like Shaul. So what does he mean then by light of the world? So I'd remind you of our discussion at Hanukkah. Yeshua uses this imagery. I think it's in John 7 or 10, right around in there. He says, I am the light of the world, right? So this is actually an object lesson. So when he walks into the outer court, both at Sukkot and at Hanukkah, they erected these 4 giant menorot. A menorah is one candelabra, right? So they erect 4 multi-story menorahs in the outer courtyard, okay? And Josephus records that there was not a shadow anywhere in all of Jerusalem. These lights were so big. At the top of them, they had these giant vats of oil that young Levites would climb up the ladder and keep these full by pouring oil in it all day long. And then after he talks, he says he sees, so the high priest getting ready for the Hanukkah celebration, he goes to this Levite, Reuben, and he goes, hey, Reuben, I need you to go to the storage shed out back, and I want you to get the light of the world out of there. And Reuben would have known, because he's one of the schleppers, right? He would have known to go out and get those 4 giant menorah, because that was their name, the light of the world. Yeshua walks in, he says, I am the light of the world. And then after that, he says to his disciples, that'd be you. You will be the light of the world. In other words, you will attract people to me. Verse 15, neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house. So what is the meaning of the imagery about hiding a light, and how would the Jewish audience understand that imagery in the first century? So first of all, it's not talking about a candlestick, okay? We now have the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. We have multiple strains of it from totally different directions, all preceding the Greek manuscripts, and the word that's there is menorah. So,
You are the menorah of the world.
yes, no different than those candlesticks in the book of Revelation, those 7 candlesticks. That's a menorah.
7 menorahs.
Okay. So first things for we did that one. So have you ever lit a candle in a room, a dark room? Okay. After a while, when your eyes adjust, you can actually see pretty well with a single candle. So consider in the first century, which is the audience this was written for, Jewish houses were constructed with one room. These are not our multi-roomed mansions that we live in today. Everyone eats, sleeps, and lives in one room. So if I put a candle in one room, I can light the whole house and everyone can see. We only need one source of light for the whole room. So Yeshua is talking to people who live in one-room houses. Light a candle, stick a bowl on top of it, would make no sense to them. If the purpose of light is to illuminate everything in your room so everyone can see, why would you live your life in such a way that you cloistered what you are doing so that no one can see it? That would make no sense. Why would you live a life of obedience, light, but shield it from the outside world? That would be like putting a bowl on top of a candle. You remember the Psalms? We used to sing this song all the time. You are a lamp unto my feet. So today, in the day of million lumen lanterns, we kind of miss the idea. It's obscured for us. In the Hebrew Bible, if I have a lamp and I want to see where I'm going, where would I hold the lamp?
Above and in front of you.
Above and in front, exactly. Okay. And you know, wait. Give me just a second here. I have one actually.
I know. We're pretty impressed you can move the western wall with one hand.
Right? Moving the cotel there. All right, so here is a first century lamp, right? Put some oil in there and a wick, and we light it on fire. That's what he's talking about. So if I'm going to go for a walk, if I'm going to go, you know, from my house to your house, which would not have been in, you know, Drain, but, you know, you live next door to me in a community, right? Okay, so I get my light and my lamp, and I light it, and now I hold this and I walk over to your house. That's all the light I'm getting. But in a room like this, that lamp would light it very well. Okay, but why would I go like that? That'd be dumb. Okay.
Yeah, burn you too.
No one would do that. No one would do that. Okay. 1 second. Where did my notes go? So I take that lamp and I hold it up and in front of me, right? If the lamp is a light to my feet, I need to have it right there in front of me so that I don't trip, right? Truth is the same. I take a step into it and then another and then another. Yeshua's audience is going to be quite familiar with these things. So it says in verse 16, in the same way, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. So the question is, there is a very strong connection between this verse and an Old Testament principle. Who is the beneficiary of the light?
Everybody.
Yeah, those around me, right? The light wasn't for me, right? Israel had its priesthood. The light in you is for everybody around you. So your light must shine in front of other people so that the other people can get down the path that you're walking on as well as you do. Again, if you're out hiking in the woods and you have a group with you, and we would use a flashlight today or something like that, I don't take the flashlight and put it right down on my feet. Why?
Because everybody else would be falling.
Everybody else trips then, right? Yeah. So I take that flashlight and I hold it up high out in front of me so everybody can see the path. And that is the only way to safely make it down the mountain. So normally in a Jewish community, you would think a lamp unto my feet. So this is the Hebraic. So when Yeshua is saying this, they're thinking, he's not saying my feet. The lamp isn't for my feet. The lamp is for their feet. So I hold the light where I can see my feet and the path, right? A lamp unto my feet. What Yeshua is saying is I hold it for their feet in front of other people. That way they know where they're going also. Otherwise, what'll happen is I'll take the lamp, put it on my feet, and I'll just start walking. And I will leave them in the dust, and they're going to end up getting hurt. And now here comes the money ball. So wake up. Make sure you catch this. Those other people see that you care about them by your actions. See, if I take that light and I put it off on my feet and I just start marching down the hill, they will understand that I don't care about them and their safety. But if I hold it up for everybody, now they go, yeah, that guy's a really nice guy. So Yeshua says, when people see you live in a way that becomes a light for them, they will glorify Yah, because they know that you did not do it for your own purposes. You did it because you care about them. So let's look at a little Old Testament Hebrew Bible history here. Was Abraham a light unto the nations?
Yep.
You bet. His faithfulness produced a heritage that we still enjoy today. How about Isaac and Yaakov?
Yep.
Joseph?
Yep.
Moshe and Yehoshua?
Yep.
They were all lights to other people. They direct this project that Yah is doing. And then people start doing their own thing and they get off track and they stop being a light to the nations. And Yah makes it really, really clear. I don't want you to be like the other nations. And so, we do the best we can to ignore his advice. I know. We'll just do what the other nations are doing, and that will attract them to us. I think that's
Because we'll do it different.
yeah.
Be dark just like them.
It never works out. I did this experiment one time at the karate school as an example for some kids. So I had this guy, great big black belt of mine. I had him stand up on a chair, okay? And I was down just standing on the mat. And I said, I want you to lift me up onto the chair. And so he grabs and he pulls. And so then I said, now this time I'm going to try to pull you off the chair. So I grabbed and I tugged. Which one do you think was easier?
Okay. Pull him down.
Pulling them down is a lot easier, right? Pulling someone uphill onto that chair was a lot tougher. So the Gentiles, it's much easier to pull us down to blow out the light than it is for them to change and come uphill. Okay, so don't imitate their ways, right? Don't learn the ways of the heathen. Israel as a collective whole, you may have noticed this while you read your Bible, doesn't always obey. Lots of bad stuff happens to them, and they end up having a war with idolatry and God, and the prophets of Baal, the high places, the Asherah trees. These are all fights over idolatry. And Yah is clear. You are mine exclusively. You do not belong to anyone else. I've actually got a contract. So do not chase those. And they do it repeatedly until finally Babylon. They go into captivity in Babylon. And then they come out and guess what?
Okay, they do it again.
Do they do idolatry again?
Not the same way.
Yeah, they got that part figured out. Okay, you are the one true God. And they've never left that since. They screwed everything else up after that. So they've never chased false gods since then. Okay, they learned that lesson. 500 years later, Yeshua comes along and he says, so you got that little piece right. Good job. Okay. But there is only, one God. It's the Shema. But you missed virtually everything else.
Baby steps.
Now, you were not called just to worship one God. You were also called to be salt and light to the rest of the world. And you all stopped doing that.
Almost immediately.
Yeah. Because, I just realized that I need to plug in my computer here. Otherwise, it's going to be a short sermon. There we go. So, because the purpose of worshiping one God was not to benefit you. It was to benefit others. Once they got the issue of idolatry, they built a wall around themselves that prevents the outside from getting in and the inside from getting out. And they created a wall of holiness so that they are Torah observant, worshiping God, and not being idolatrous. And Yeshua is calling them to be an open community that embraces others. And guess what? By the end of the resurrection, that's exactly what Yeshua tells them to do. Now the Gentiles should be invited in. Do you get this lesson now?
Mostly no.
Well, on Pentecost, how many were saved that day?
5,000?
3,000 that day, right? Yeah. And for the first couple hundred years, it grew like wildfire. They did get it.
But it was a very small percentage of the total.
Absolutely. The however, that small portion began to invite them in. But even Peter and Paul struggled with this, right? They had a kind of a face-to-face, mano-a-mano conversation about this, right? They had this wall called, you got to be a Jew. And Shaul comes along and he goes, no. You are missing Yah's intention. His intention was for all the Gentiles to become in and become Israel and become royal priests so that they could go out and reach more. Now, does that mean that the Gentiles come in and do whatever they want?
No.
No, absolutely not. They come in and become part of the commonwealth of Israel. We see that in Ephesians very clearly. I think it's chapter 2 or 3. And Israel expands as it accepts more and more members who become followers of Yehovah and his instructions. And by the 2nd century, Israel was battling the Christian church big time. The politics of Rome was right in the middle of it, killing both sides. And the space or void between what Yah intended and what Yah would bring in the Gentiles, and the Gentiles went one way, called it Christianity. Orthodox Judaism, the Pharisees, went another way, and we call that Rabbinic Judaism today. So they went like this when Yah intended them to go like this.
Which is fairly typical of the whole world.
Mm-hmm. So we end up with these two great faiths today, Christianity and Judaism. They both have the same origins, both intended to meld together in a way to attract the world, both responsible for their walled off orthodoxy in their attempt to be holy. And we are responsible for demanding they become like us. The big issue of the first century was how do they get the Gentiles to become like us? We see that play out in the Gospels and Paul's letters. The big issue today for Christians is how do we make the Jews into Christians? It has literally flip-flopped. So we can ask, which group, Christians or Jews, which group is the more persecuted? I always hear this from the Christians. Oh, everybody's persecuting us. Oh, it's so terrible. I can't even say Jesus now. Oh, it's so terrible. The Jews have been persecuted from time immemorial. The Christians are persecuted because they can't say the word Jesus somewhere, and that's not even his name. So why have the Jews been persecuted from time immemorial? Because they are the threat to the world. They are obedient to Torah. They won't assimilate. Do we not have a discussion about assimilation in our country going on right now?
Oh, yeah.
The church has been assimilating for 2,000 years, becoming more and more and more like culture. So remember, Yeshua is calling his first century Jewish audience not Messianic. And he is calling them back to something they already know as part of their heritage. God called them into a particular nation so he could use them in a special way. You were supposed to be the light. You were supposed to be the salt. Do not forget what Yah called you to do. And it was not for your benefit. It was for the world's benefit. You, the audience, need to understand that Yah has not changed his mind on that and come back to what Yah intended. It's all about restoring the original. Forget about the stuff that you've accumulated over centuries, which would lead you to think you couldn't have interaction with Gentiles. The traditions need to be set aside, and we need to embrace what Yah has intended originally. Be the place where the world came for preservation. And where the world came because you were an attractive light. Torah obedience, the instructions of the Father, are not evil, they're not bad, they're not the law. They're the instructions of a loving Father that, if you live them, will attract people to you, not make people go away. Except we took, in general, the Hebrew Roots movement took the light and we turned it into flamethrowers. And we'd go around and we would burn everybody. Damn it, don't you know the commandments? Damn it, you're evil. You're not keeping a clean diet. Oh, shame on you. You're not wearing tzitzit. Oh, you guys are terrible. You don't even know God's right name. You sinners. See, I'm the light. Aren't I attractive? And what did everybody say? Yeah, no, sorry, that's not attractive. Verse 17. Think not that I have come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. And I'm sure most of us are very familiar with this section, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. This is one of the most misunderstood verses in the Gospels. The meaning of the verse depends on the meaning of the word fulfill, which in the Greek is plero, and in the Hebrew malah. It means to fill up, like filling up the frame of a picture or filling up a water cup. It does not mean to finish. So most Bible versions stick a paragraph at 5:17. Only a handful put the paragraph starting back at light and salt. So look in your Bible. Now, like if you have a King James or a Scriptures Bible like I use, they just have each verse listed separately. They don't use paragraphs. But if you're using a Bible that uses paragraphs, go to Matthew 5:17 and look to see if that is in the middle of a paragraph, or is 5:17 the beginning of your paragraph?
The beginning.
Most common will be the beginning.
Hebrews name 17 is the beginning of a paragraph.
Okay. So number one, we have to understand there were no paragraphs in Greek.
Right.
Or Hebrew. Okay. And so putting that paragraph indention there is a scholar's opinion, a translator's opinion. Okay. And as we've learned over the years, scholars oftentimes have agendas. So, I should say translators often have agendas. So paragraphs are artificial aids to help you understand your thoughts, or maybe in this case, their thoughts. So what happens when the previous verses on salt and light are connected to that verse 5:17? What then does it say or mean? So what were the, if you are going to be the salt and the light that God wants, what do you have to do?
You have to do the Torah.
You have to obey the instructions of the Torah. If that's true, and we're in the same paragraph, then when he says, I didn't come to destroy the law, and until everything is filled, well, he's never going to get rid of the law, is he? He can't get rid of the law because that's the very thing that makes you salt and light. So it's not that we pick out verse 517 and we go, you guys are wrong because the Greek verb here is plero and it means to fill up and bring full meaning to something. Yeah, that's all true. But now let's look at it in the context of the whole paragraph. Their response is, it's the beginning of the paragraph. I can make it mean whatever I want. It's the thesis statement. To which the answer is, God said he's not setting aside the Torah. It's the Torah that makes you light and salt. So his own words would be in disagreement with himself. So now they have a schizophrenic Messiah. You cannot break apart salt and light from the discussion of verse 517. So it's not that I stopped thinking about salt and light, and now I need to be thinking about something else called the law. The law, the Torah, is the salt and light. The reason he gave you the Torah is to be salt and light. So if we're going to take the position the Torah is done away with, then I have no way to be the salt and light anymore. And since his purpose has not been done away with yet, neither has the Torah. I have not come here to set aside the law. I'm telling you the Torah is important to understand and what Yah's purposes are. The Torah is not going away.
They basically, most people just ignore this and just pretend it's not there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when it's argued, if you actually sit down and debate someone, it will be about just that sentence. But you can't cherry pick the sentence out. And it definitely, the paragraph doesn't start in 517, which is why the translators put it there. They're making it a thesis statement for a new paragraph so that they can only talk about it. So notice what, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Then the New American Standard 2020 edition, they have headings, and the heading, Disciples in the World, starts at 13 and continues through 20. That's actually right.
That's correct. They're actually being honest with where the paragraph would really start.
Yeah.
Or where the thought change would occur, right?
Sure.
Okay, so notice what Matityahu's doing. He's putting all of these connected sayings together until we get to another event. Wait, I feel like I missed something here. Nope, okay, that's weird. We must keep asking ourselves, how are these connected? Remember that the pattern in Genesis that we talked about, a genealogy followed by a whole bunch of narrative events, followed by another genealogy. There's like 10 of them that are listed in Genesis. So how do I know when the narrative event stops? Oh, look, there's another genealogy. Okay, there's a pattern within Genesis, and Matthew has been using that Toldot pattern in the book of Matthew the last few chapters. So here he's teaching, and then there will be a story, and then he's going to have teaching, and then a story. So that's how you know all these things are connected. But there's no paragraphs, no sentences, no chapters. That is how Matthew does it, by using teachings and stories, just like Genesis did. Okay, verse 18. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no way pass from the law till all be fulfilled. So a jot and tittle. There are competing theories on this. I personally find that mine is the best. So number one, it is not the pointing of the text with vowels. We know the Masoretes did this. So give me a second here to reach over here by the other side of the cotel. This will be a bit backwards for you guys. But I think you'll be able to work with it.
In the 2020 version of the New American Standard, it says the smallest letter or stroke of a letter shall not pass from the law. I like that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. So for my Hebrew scholars here among you, remember this is backwards. I understand that. So when the original Hebrew text was made, we had a bunch of consonants there are 22 consonants in the Hebrew alphabet. Okay. So this consonant here, the lines, okay, is the letter B, our letter B. Okay. The lines underneath it, in this case, can you guys see this okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the letter, the vowel sound A. Okay. So I would pronounce this ba. Okay. Then this is this line here. This is an A sound also. Today it's typically just pronounced ba also. If I get 2 dots, then that's be. If I get 3 dots, it's going to be be. If I get a dot on the side, that's going to be bo. If I get 3 dots at an angle, it's going to be boo. Okay. So all these markings that are put here underneath the text, or sometimes kind of up above the text, those are vowels. They're not letters. Okay. So when the Masoretes came along, group of scribes, they said, we can't change the text. The text is God's holy word to us. So we can't change that. So we have to put these vowel points under, on the side, or above the letters, because we don't have the authority to change God's words. So that's why their vowels are where they are at. Now, in addition to that, later we get cantillation marks. Cantillation marks tell you how to sing the Torah. And those cantillation marks all get stuck up on top of the letters. There's a few that go below, but mostly on top. Okay? Then some letters also, like you'll see this one has a point there, a dot in the middle of it. Okay? That dot is called nikud in modern Hebrew, dagesh in ancient Hebrew. So that dot changes it from a V sound, as in Volkswagen, to a B sound, as in boy. Okay, that little dot. All right. So you kind of need to know that to understand what's going on here. Okay, put that back for a second.
By the way, just so you know, that wasn't backwards for me.
Oh,
It was
good.
backwards.
Okay. So it is not the pointing of the text with vowels, what I just showed you. We know the Masoretes tell us they were the ones who put the vowel markings there. Okay. And what happened is everything was oral. It was by hearing that you learned all of this and seeing, right? But not everybody had their own Bible, their own Torah scroll, right? That Torah scroll is going to cost you 55 sheepskins and a 50-gallon barrel of oil to write, plus the scribe's time, okay? So not everybody has one of these. So, but we know that it was the Masoretes that did all of that. So I was, as I sometimes do, I try not to be too much of a stalker, but I will often go and listen to other pastors in town, and just to keep my thumb on what's going on in the church and stuff like that. And gee, I wonder what their message is this week. And so I happened to flip on this thing, and he's giving this whole thing about how this guy that lives in Israel told him about the jots and the tittles, and that these are the points that exist underneath the letters of the text.
Oh, that's not true.
No, the Masoretes put those there. Okay.
In what, 6th century?
Yeah, so they were around the 6th century, yes. Now, Skip Mullen, he will tell you that, and there's not a lot of things I disagree with on Skip. There's a few, and when they come along, I let you know. So let me think here if I can remember one. Noon, I think Noon is one of them. Okay, we see this? So this is the letter Noon, our letter N, okay? And on 7 of the letters in the Hebrew 7 out of 22 Hebrew letters, consonants, they put crownlets or serifs on top. So his position is that those crownlets, those little fleur-de-lis type looking thing, okay, that those are the jots and tittles. Okay, I disagree with that, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Okay, but you'll see if you look to the Hebrew alphabet, there will actually be 9 of them, 9 letters, but 2 of those letters are final letters. So I write my Noon like this one, but if it comes at the end of the word, it looks like that. So there are 2 letters that get the crownlets, and because those letters look differently in different places, it still gets the crownlet. Okay, so there's actually 7 letters, but 2 final sophites that get it. All right, clear as mud? Did everybody faint? Are we still there?
Yeah, we're here.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. It's nothing but crickets there for a second. All right. So now.
It's the crownlets. It was in my brain, sorry.
Crownlets, yes, or serifs, they'll call them. Or just think like crownlets, little crowns, right? They're supposed to look like little crowns. So that because these are the treasures, they say, okay? All right, so let me pull something up here. Orthographic. Okay, so when I was in my Hebrew 311 class, I had to write a paper on something of my choice, and you never let me do that. And so, because I will find the weirdest thing in the world to start writing on. So I'm going. I would not normally do this, but these I don't. I'm sure they're in storage somewhere. I don't have my original research in front of me. So so I want to read to you a little bit of this paper that I wrote, and it will contain that original research. Okay. So there are. So we're not talking vowels. We are not talking crownlets. Okay. The Hebrew Bible was inspired, has inspired many throughout the course of mankind. It has brought both unity and division among people. It has been the source of great academic study and cause for great academic discussion. And after thousands of years of study, it still contains much mystery. As biblical scholars continue to research the Holy Writ, theories about the text are proved over time. Bad ideas fall aside and new ideas emerge as new discoveries are made and data points connected. Give me 1 second to let someone in here. There we go. One mystery that deserves another look is the orthographic irregularities found within the Hebrew Bible. This essay will consider whether these special markings within the Hebrew Bible, specifically the inverted nuns, should be considered a relevant part of the text itself or viewed as additional to the text and the effects thereof. So my instructor's comment was, you write like the intro of National Geographic, and that he had never heard of an orthographic irregularity in the Bible before. So I immediately caught him off guard. Kelly, 1998, classifies these orthographic irregularities as extraordinary points, inverted nuns, suspended letters, large letters, small letters, a broken vav, closed mem, and open mem. So nun is the 14th letter of the Hebrew alphabet and is the equivalent of our letter English N. Normally written in Hebrew, it would appear as, I just showed it to you. There are several places in the Hebrew Bible they appear facing the opposite direction. So instead of looking like this, they look like that. These are found in Numbers 10, verses 35 and 36. Psalm 107, verses 22 to 28. Felsenthal, 1883. They knew about this in the 1800s, and still people don't talk about it. So each of these 9 verses has an inverted nun either before or after it. Felsenthal, 1883, also points out that the inverted nuns are of a, quote, very high antiquity. They were already in use centuries before the vowel signs and the accent signs were added to the consonant text of the Bible by the Masoretes. So the Masoretes will tell you, we didn't do it. We didn't make it like that, okay? We said that the consonants are holy and we're not touching them. So the Masoretes added their markings to the text roughly between 600 CE and 750 CE, Kelly, 1998. According to the expert of the Dead Sea Scrolls, according to an expert, the Dead Sea Scrolls also have orthographic irregularities. Falk, 2010 interview. The Dead Sea Scrolls are dated between 150 BC and 70 CE. So, well aware these existed prior to Yeshua's time, okay? The first century rabbi, this is how I get away with things, Yeshua ben Joseph, makes an interesting, so you can't say Jesus to the scholars because they're going to freak out.
That's right.
So Yeshua ben Yosef makes an interesting comment in the New Testament book of Matthew 5:18. For truly I say to you, till the heavens and the earth pass away, one jot or one tittle shall by no means pass from the Torah till all be done. Scriptures 2007. Modern teaching on this verse refers to a jot as the smallest Greek and Hebrew letter and a tittle as hooks or serifs or crownlets placed on top of the letters for ornamentation. Parsons 2010. However, a Hebrew version of the book of Matthew appears in a 14th century CE polemical treaty entitled Evan Bohan, Howard, 1995. So this is what we call the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew today, okay? While originally thought to be a Hebrew translation from Greek, it is now considered to be an original Hebrew manuscript. The Hebrew book of Matthew refers to these jots and tittles as points, nikudim, and signs, semnim, Howard, 1995. These points and signs in the book of Matthew may very well be the orthographic irregularities we find in the Hebrew Bible. What a shock. The Talmud also refers to the orthographic irregularities by these same names, Felsenthal, 1885. Scholars should note that of these signs and points mentioned in the Hebrew Matthew are a reference to the orthographic irregularities. They were seen as part of the Torah itself by at least one prominent first century rabbi. Okay, so in other words, these orthographic irregularities, for example, these inverted nuns, right? But there are like 175 different ones, okay? That these are part of the text. So you can't understand the text without understanding that those are part of the text. And that means that we're supposed to be able to figure something out about them and that they have meaning to us, okay? So what I want you guys to do is look in your English Bible and tell me where they're at.
Yeah, about that.
So that means the Christian translators have made a decision to actually take some of the Word of God out of the Bible. That seems concerning to me. What they literally did is they made the jots and tittles disappear. The point being, Yeshua says, not the tiniest part of the law will disappear. Until when? Until everything is fulfilled. Well, they took them out. So clearly everything must be fulfilled, right? No, it's permanent. The rabbis actually say that the Torah is older than creation itself. So when Yeshua spoke this, did the New Testament exist? No, it hadn't been written yet. Matthew still had a long ways to go before he wrote that. So what would Yeshua have considered Torah? Technically, the books of Moshe by the first century, though, Torah becomes a summary word for all of the Hebrew scriptures. So the prophets and the writings. So this has some kind of interesting implications because he says it will never go away. And yet the contemporary Christian systematic theological church does not live by it. In fact, we don't even live by the 10 commandments today. Number 4 got modified, right? So when Yeshua speaks of the permanence of the law, does that only apply to Jews? Or is there a bigger implication than that? If we argue the position, all those laws are for the Jews, well, what kind of implications does that raise for us New Testament believers then? Shaul tells us that we are grafted into the commonwealth of Israel, the stump, the root, and don't mock the stump, except that's all we do is mock the stump. Those are for the Jews. And if God's instructions are permanent for the Jews and we're grafted into the commonwealth, then that means it has to apply to us. Otherwise, we're arguing for apartheid. And I don't think we want to go there these days. There's actually a big conversation among Messianic Jewish congregations today, whether there is one Torah for the Jews and one Torah for the Gentiles. And it has to do with how you read Acts chapter 15, the council at Jerusalem. But it is not a controversy about whether Jew and Gentile live under the Torah. That's given. It just happens to be about which laws apply to whom. For example, when Paul says that he didn't press Timothy to be circumcised, but circumcision is part of the Torah, right? And so the question becomes, well, how can Paul say this, right? So clearly there's a contextual understanding that has to happen there. Okay. Sidebar at Jerusalem. We're going to skip that. Skip that. Verse 19. We are at 3:39, and I still have energy. Okay, let's keep going. This is like the old days when I used to go for hours. All right. So, verse 19. This is my first mind blow. Okay. Again, this is one of the things. This actually had to repent of this. This is one of the things that I have taught, and I taught it without knowing from a Greek perspective, not thinking about this instead of a Hebraic perspective. So I mind blew myself, and almost got hurt thinking about this. So, whosoever therefore shall break one of the least commandments and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Now, I've even heard other Hebraic pastors teach this the same way I've done this, right? I would like to introduce to you, this is Pastor Least. He kept very few of the commandments. And because of that, I spent a great deal of time mocking him for not doing so. So this is kind of really strange. It seems to do two things. Number one, you can be in the kingdom of heaven and still teach and do wrong things. And number two, if you do those things, your status in the kingdom of heaven will be greater than a person who doesn't. So that all kind of seems backwards in light of don't we teach everybody that you come into the kingdom of heaven by grace alone, through faith? So our question has to be, how would the first century audience, Jewish audience, understand that verse? So would there be anybody in Matthew's audience who's reading this gospel that believes they are not a part of the kingdom of heaven?
No, there would not.
No, of course not. He's talking to Jews. They think, hey, we've been in the kingdom of heaven since we were born. God chose us 5,000 years ago. Are we not the apple of his eye? Are we not his people? Do we not have a priesthood? We don't worship idols anymore, and he shows us favor. So as far as everyone in that audience is concerned, this is not a question of salvation. And I never taught it as a question of salvation. Yeshua is not talking about how to get saved here, okay? He's talking about what happens when you are already in the realm of the kingdom. It's not a question of obedience for salvation. The audience in that culture never would have thought that, okay? And if you really wanted to, you could go get E.P. Sanders' book, Paul and the Palestinian Jews, 1977, where he reiterates, and this is where I found it first, no one except Christians think that thought, because we're taught that in evangelism classes. But no Jew ever thought they were following the Torah to get salvation, okay? This verse is about how Yah deals with the people who are already in the kingdom and yet have misunderstood or are disobedient to Torah. That raises an interesting question now. Does the Torah have anything to do at all with salvation?
No.
Absolutely not. Galatians and Romans makes this very clear. So now we have this problem about lesser and greater, okay? So in our Greek culture, in our minds, when we think of greater, we think in terms of hierarchy. The leaders are greater than the followers, for example. But obviously, that is not what Yeshua teaches. He says, if you want to be a great leader, you'll have to be at the bottom of the pile. So how does the Hebrew worldview of greater and lesser change how we see this verse? It is not about where you stand in rank order. Remember, Hebrew is about action and function, okay? Those who are greater means those who are more useful. God can accomplish more through them, but it has nothing to do with hierarchy. So compare that the assessment with Yeshua's words about John the Baptist in Matthew 11:11. John is the greatest of prophets, but what does he say? I must decline so that he may increase. Moshe is considered the greatest prophet in Israel, and yet the Bible says he was the most humble man on the earth. So why is Moshe the greatest prophet? Because Yah accomplished great things through him. He led people through the wilderness for 40 years. He was at Mount Sinai. He opened the waters of the Red Sea. So what we'll do is we'll just make a line. Everybody who's done those things, come to the front. Oh yeah, it's only Moses. So in a Greek worldview, we think of relative value and success. The bigger, the better. Costco size it, please. Greater to us translates to pedestals and trophies on the wall, gold watches, blah, blah, blah. And those who are applauded and lauded and held high. Hebrews think of relative usefulness. Greater and lesser become verbs, not adjectives. And this means I am more in alignment with him, and that means he uses me more to accomplish his will. Lesser just means not as efficiently available for God's purposes. So I think the metaphor of a pipe works really well here. The bigger the pipe, the more flow can go through it. The smaller the pipe, the less the flow, right? But a bigger pipe does not have higher rank than a smaller pipe. So if I take an 8-inch pipe and run it out to my sprinkler system in my front yard, it's going to break the sprinkler and flood the yard because it's too big. It's not going to be very useful that way, right? Water's going to flood everywhere. I want a small pipe that has lots of force so that it's restricted to shoot the sprinkler out there, right? So the bigger the pipe, the less pressure in that case. So this is not about the value of the pipes. Both pipes have value. This is about flow. How useful can it be? So Why are you greater in the kingdom? Because you are more useful. Don't follow Torah and teach it incorrectly. That is not useful. You're still part of the kingdom. You're welcome in. Okay. But Yah has to keep reminding that person, re-educating that person, chastising that person, correcting that person. And this is part of why teachers are judged more harshly, Peter tells us. The guy who knows Torah, Yah can just pour his spirit through him and put him into whatever scenario he needs him in. And that's exactly what we see in Paul's life. It's exactly what we see in Yeshua's life. It's exactly what we see in the apostles' and disciples' lives in Scripture. So it is strictly a matter of usefulness inside the kingdom. It's still the kingdom, okay? All right, verse 20. For I say unto you, that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, this is actually a verse I've never personally taught on before, because it just didn't make sense to me, okay? And now I know why. So we're going to take you back to middle school. I am going to become the grammar Nazi again, so hang in there. This is an example of hyperbole, okay? Plural hyperboles. An exaggerated statement or claim not meant to be taken literally, as in the sentence, he vowed revenge with oaths and hyperboles. So, when someone says to you that they take the Bible literally, does that mean they take the parts that aren't literal as well? Do they even know what a metaphor is, or an analogy, or a simile, or a parable, or a hyperbole, or a mnemonic? Did they fail 7th grade literature class? I'm betting yes. So, what does Yeshua say? He is talking to this crowd and he says, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the Pharisees. Okay, so think about this. What was the righteousness of the Pharisees like? How would you guys describe the righteousness of the Pharisees?
The righteousness of the Pharisees was a false righteousness because it was based on their own rules and they ignored what God actually said to do.
Not disagreeing. Did the Pharisees know the Torah?
Yes, they did.
Okay, how well?
Well, extremely well.
Extremely well, okay? They were extremely careful to keep all of the details of it, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, can you think of an example of that? An example of them being extremely careful.
Of the Sabbath. They put too many hedges around it.
Okay, so they really wanted to keep Sabbath, but they built fences. Absolutely, totally agree there. Okay, is there another example you guys can think of?
Keeping the feast.
True.
Washing your hands before you eat.
That one was an additional one that was added. Okay.
Right.
But the point being is that they were doing that to be zealous, right?
Yes.
It wasn't because they hated God that they were doing it. They were doing it out of zealotry. Okay. It was like Brian said, it was misplaced. Okay. So imagine I want to, play my guitar for Shabbat service. I don't play guitar. I'm making an example here. But I can't because I'm not allowed to carry things on Shabbat. So I can't bring it to the synagogue from my house. So here they make a fence and they say, well, we can't have instruments at Sabbath service. So if we have no music at all, then no one will forget and bring their musical instrument and make a mistake. So they built these fences that we're all well aware of, the oral Torah. They built the fences around the Torah in an effort to be exceedingly righteous. So when Yeshua says your righteousness must exceed the Pharisees, what do you think the crowds thought?
You gotta follow all those rules. You're thinking, at least.
I started to hear someone else too. I didn't want to interrupt. Okay. So the Pharisees are trying to be exceedingly righteous. Okay. And what is the Pharisees' job in life?
They're to teach others how to the Torah.
Absolutely. They were the teachers of the Torah. So all day long, they are reading the Torah, studying the Torah, teaching the Torah, praying. They're doing all of this stuff, right? And then Yeshua comes along and he says, you need to have more, exceedingly more righteousness than they do. What's your thought?
Can't happen. How can I do that with all the stuff that they do?
You got horses to feed, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you got a farm
Pay to
run.
get.
There's no way that I can do what they're doing. No one could do that. See, it's hyperbole, okay? It would be impossible. They are already exceedingly righteous. They go out and they count the leaves on their mint plants, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, pluck, and they go give it to the temple. So how is it possible to have righteousness far beyond the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees? It's not. See, this is where reading it literally fails us. Does Yeshua really ask us to exceed their meticulous law keeping? No, it's not possible to do that. That's why it's hyperbole.
If you're going to do that, you might as well go send your camel through the eye of a needle.
Yeah, there you go, right? So the Pharisees were full-time Pharisees. This wasn't a side gig. It's not like I fix web pages for people on the side, okay? They couldn't do it. How would the average Reuben do this when he's working a job and raising a family? And in some cases, the Pharisees were derogatory to the population because they were considered the unwashed people.
It's also important to note that the Pharisees were self-appointed. They weren't actually appointed by God to have that position. They decided when they were in Babylon that that's what they were going to do.
Yeah, they created a position for themselves. Now, we learn in the New Testament, Yeshua says that now there are people with the gift of teaching. There's nothing wrong with that, okay? And if everybody wants to do it that way, that's fine. But it's not, you're right, it's not a Torah commandment to do it. So why then would Yeshua say, unless your righteousness exceeds their righteousness? And this is where it gets serious. Guess what? If it doesn't, you're not getting into heaven. And that's why I never preached on this. So we have to ask the question next, what would righteousness mean to them when they heard righteousness? Because it doesn't matter what it means to Al, okay? So Yeshua has just talked about the performance of the Torah, the usefulness of the Torah within the kingdom. The usefulness means living it out. And then he says, Your usefulness in the kingdom and the permanence of Torah requires you to be obedient, and your obedience has to exceed that of the Pharisees. So to them, there are three key points or pillars of righteousness to a Jewish congregant in the first century: prayer, acts of charity, and study of Torah, which includes not just memorizing it, but the actions of doing it. Okay. Those are acts of righteousness. And that is what the audience is thinking of when they hear Yeshua say this. So how can anyone exceed the amount of prayer that the Pharisees are doing? I mean, go look at a Siddur. They have prayers for everything. They even got a prayer to go to the bathroom. So the Pharisees studied the Torah all the time. They prayed all the time. They did acts of charity all the time.
Yes, but they were missing the heart end of it.
I totally agree. Okay. They were praying in the synagogues. They were praying on the street corners. Nothing wrong with praying, right? So Yeshua has to mean something other than that. What he means is, you can't. It's not possible. If you are going to try to do a relationship with God on the basis of rule keeping, you can't. That's the point of the hyperbole. So salvation must come from somewhere else. And Shaul, Paul, argues it must come from God. It's a gift. Again, Romans and Galatians, very clear about this. So even the big three pillars of righteousness do not obligate God to let you in the kingdom. And he's using hyperbole to make that point. He's boxing his audience into a corner because they're thinking the Torah is forever. It's up to me to keep and be useful to God. Therefore, I'm going to make sure I have done everything on the list and get it checked off. So my motivation for being obedient cannot be about obligating God to accept me. All right, now, in verses 21 to 47, he gives 6 examples of elaboration on the Torah. Okay, so I think most Christians are probably quite familiar with these verses and their implied Torah commandments. But I want you to suspend that, what you grew up with there, the systematic theological interpretation, and ask yourself, what do these statements, what would they have meant to a Jewish audience of the first century? We're at 4 o'clock. We're doing good. Can you guys handle a little bit more?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Excellent. Good. Okay. We're going to make it through verse 21 or 2 or something like that. All right. So 5:21, you have heard it said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. So remember, your righteousness must exceed that of the Pharisees. So let's examine some of what they have taught you. In each example, it reads, you have heard this, but I tell you this, okay? And not all of the examples in these 6 examples, not all of the examples in the you have heard category are scriptural. It is a discussion of the oral law, what you have heard. It's not about what it says. And that's really important to grasp here. He is dealing with the common understanding of the people. So we'll give you a modern example. You've heard it said, eating fat is bad for you. But I say, eating sugar is what makes you fat. So the common understanding in the 70s, that was started in the 70s, we got rid of oils because oils make you fat. And the population was getting fat. And so we said, don't use oil, right? So we got rid of the oils and everybody got fat. What happened is that we got rid of the oil and they started eating more sugar. And it's the sugar that makes you fat, not the fat. So we're talking about if I went down to the store today and interviewed 100 people coming out of Fred Meyer and I said, what makes you fat? They would start listing all sorts of fats. Because that's the common understanding. So he does not say, Devarim 2014 says this, and now I'll give you the commentary. It's talking about common understanding. So he is using their common understanding for the basis of his comments. What is the common understanding? Do not murder. Well, they know that. It's from the 10 Commandments. But what does anyone who murders is subject to judgment? Where does that part come from? That's not in Scripture. And that's the problem. Yah has a punishment for murder. What's the punishment for murder?
Death.
Death, right? So if Bob murders me, I get to go kill his wife, right?
No.
Why not? Wouldn't that be a life for a life? Measure for measure?
Yes, it would.
It would.
But
Why don't I get to kill his wife? I actually hate his wife too. Why can't I kill them both?
because God says you're not supposed to.
Well, God says the person who did the murder is responsible and must pay with his own life.
That's right. So it's measure for measure. I only get to take out one person. Okay. I don't get to take out their whole village for it. Okay. And it's the person who's responsible for it whose life pays. Okay. So anywhere in that discussion that we just had there, does it say that I go to a court?
Nope.
No. Murder was a capital offense. I got 2 witnesses here that said that happened. We go down to the farm, get an axe, and it's over with. Walk home. Life for a life. Okay. Nothing about a court. Okay. God has already fixed the judgment. Okay. There is no need for the judgment to be determined by the court. The common culture said murder is awful. And if someone is caught and convicted of murder, they go in front of the judge. Yeshua is saying that is your common understanding. Now, let's say that the community standard is you go fetch the guy and you bring him to the elders at the gate, right? And you bring with you 2 witnesses and you go, hey, this guy killed my son, and here are the 2 witnesses that saw it. And so the council, the elders go, he's good. That's murder. That counts as murder. Okay. Does the judge then get to make up his own judgment about what happens?
No, he has to follow God's rules.
God's law already determines what's going to happen, right? Okay. So there's no reason to go before the judge for a ruling. Okay. So now Yeshua is going to look at what's behind the Torah here. What's deeper than Torah? What's the motivation factor? Okay. Verse 22. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or a sister will be subject to judgment. Again, Anyone who says to a brother or sister, Rakah, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Yeshua says, if you use bad words against someone, that is the equivalent of murder. At least that's what it looks like he's saying. And that's what I was always taught that he was saying. Did you ever hear something like that?
Oh, yeah.
All right.
No, I didn't, but when you read it, isn't he saying that the anger is the cause of the murder? You need to not be angry.
Let's see where we go with that. So verse 21 begins with a regulation straight from the Decalogue, right? Thou shalt not murder. So the word anger in the text means a violent eruption. So it's not just that I'm mad at the guy or that he frustrated me, okay? It's an explosive outburst of violence towards someone. In Hebrew, in Greek, it's the word orgizo, okay? Why would Yeshua go from murder to explosively violent towards someone, okay? It comes as a result of something that has already happened. So in the biblical text of Torah, there's a difference between murder and manslaughter. Murder requires you to know the victim, and it needs to be intentional. So in other words, it cannot be a stranger. You cannot murder a stranger. Why? Because murder is deliberate and intended malice towards someone that you hate. In other words, you've got a history.
And you have some explosive anger.
Say again?
And you have some explosive anger.
Yeah, and that has probably built up over time, right?
Yep.
So the context of a Hebrew community is that that could not happen to someone unless you did know them. So there needs to be a reason why you decide to step in and act as God and give them a summary judgment. There is already something with this person that you have had a violent, eruptive behavior towards. So the difference between manslaughter and murder. Murder is premeditated. Manslaughter is accidental death. So we find a great example of this in Devarim, Deuteronomy 19:5-6. It's the story of the two lumberjacks. As when a man goeth into the wood with his neighbor to hew wood, and his hand fetcheth a stroke with his axe to cut down the tree, and the head slippeth from the helve, and lighten upon his neighbor, that he dies. He shall flee unto one of those cities, the cities of refuge, and live, lest the avenger of the blood pursue the slayer while his heart is hot, and overtake him, because the way is long, and slay him. Whereas he is not worthy of death, inasmuch as he has hated him not in the past. The point being is that it was accidental. It was unplanned. It did not come about from an explosive, violent eruption. So by accident, call it act of God, there is provision. Does that mean the person just walks away? No. The person can go to a city of refuge and be protected there from the avenger who's pissed off because his dad died. Okay. It is the act, if the act is deliberate, will the city of refuge protect you?
No.
Absolutely not. You can go hang on the horns of the altar and you will still not be protected if it's murder, because it was a deliberate act. And if it's a deliberate and intentional and it results in death, boom, capital punishment, Bob's your uncle. So no matter what the other circumstances were, So when Yeshua reminds them of this text about murder, he is reminding them of a context that they fully are aware of. And we have an example in the Gospels of Yeshua being brought before Pilate and accused of blasphemy. And Pilate says so. And then he says, yeah, we don't have any laws against blasphemy. So they changed the accusation to sedition. Why would they change it? Because they're not allowed to use capital punishment. On top of all of the intent and the explosive violence, you must also have 2 witnesses. And they must be eyewitnesses. There is no hearsay, no DNA evidence, no CSI crime shows. One witness of a man killing another man was not enough evidence to convict him. Even if he was guilty and everyone knew it, he could not be convicted. And that is to protect the innocent person who is accused without confirmation. It errs in the favor of compassion. And isn't that what you want in a judge and a court system? There will be cases with only one witness, and the guilty party walks away. And you might be upset about that, but your hope and your understanding is that Yah will eventually be their judge. But in terms of civil law, he walks away because Yah set it up to incline towards compassion and not judgment. So just as a mini little sidebar here, I would encourage us when in being quick to judge others, right? Maybe our lives need to incline towards compassion instead of judgment. That would be more like God. Otherwise, if you heard about it and you complained, boom, he's guilty. So Yeshua has all of this stuff in his mind as background information when he talks about murder. And then he says, don't you see? Don't you understand? The things that happen before the event are the things that precipitated the event, that caused the event. And if you are involved in activities that will lead to murder, it is the equivalent of murder. You just haven't had time to carry it out yet. Now, it's important to note that the word is not kill in the Decalogue. It's murder. In the Greek, phoneuo, in the Hebrew, ratzak. But there's a slight change in the way Matthew expresses punishment for the violation of the commandment. What's the change? That they be subject to judgment. And he uses the same phrase in verse 22. So the first word is anger, or gizo. The second word is adelphois, which means brother, like literally a physical brother. What does this imply about the application of the statement? It does not say anyone. It specifically says brother, which means there has to be a relationship between the two, such as they share some form of community. So it could be a physical brother, or it could be like, you're my brother in the Lord, and we live in community together, right? So this is not about screaming at the guy in the car next to you. You can still do that, okay? You have no idea who that guy is, unless, of course, he's actually your brother, right?
Then you can't scream at him anymore?
Yeah, you got it. Well, we're on rough ground then, okay? So maybe he is more of a brother than you thought, though, okay? If he belongs to the community of Yah's children, then in one sense, he is related to you. So that kind of anger would still apply here. So if you know the person and still have that kind of anger towards them, then it could lead to what the Hebrew concept of murder is about. It all depends on knowing the person. It's as opposed to what Mrs. Doubtfire called a drive-by fruiting, right? So those two words help us understand what this is all about. There is a possible, also there's a sidebar, there is a possible textual addition to this verse, the phrase without cause. Not all manuscripts have that, and not all translations use it. Okay, so the verse uses a Hebrew parallel technique in the second part. Yeshua uses the term rakah. This was a term from ordinary daily conversation, not an unusual expletive. My understanding had always been that this was an expletive, okay? It was not like swearing at the person. And if if it is not harsh and not an expletive, okay, like that idiot cut me off, that fool cut me off, okay, why does he use an ordinary term instead of one showing vituperative anger, bitter and abusive anger, right? What does this imply about Yeshua's meaning? Think about the way Yeshua is helping these people think about the commandment. What he's trying to do is get them to think about the commandment in a different way. He's shifting their thinking from what the Pharisees had taught them. So murder is an act. It's a deliberate act of intentional harm to another with a purpose of ending their lives. And then he steps back a step. And behind that act is knowing a person and being emotionally upset with them. And behind that act is calling someone an idiot or a fool or stupid or you're a moron. Oh, gee, I'm really good at using those words. Or racha, or whatever the word is that you're good at using. Now, in other words, it's exactly what you would expect Yaakov to say in his book. It starts with the tongue and ultimately leads to the hand. Yeshua just backs his audience up and helps them to see that this act of murder comes from this happening and this happening and this happening. So go ahead.
Sorry. So wouldn't it be if you were saying, you fool, basically aren't you passing judgment?
You are, that's correct.
And then you pass judgment and then you get frustrated and then you get angry and then it builds and it builds and it builds and you commit murder.
And then we have giant parades walking down the street with two sides that don't listen to each other. And soon somewhere shoots a gun. Someone somewhere shoots a gun.
Yep.
See, it's just this giant snowball. But it all started with, well, you're an idiot. That's what he's saying. So the use of an ordinary term leads in the same direction of harm to another. So there's a pattern where one thing builds on another. And ultimately, we will get to the principle of let your yes be yes and your no be no. And then just stand on that. But even a word can lead you towards this path. And that's Yeshua's concern. Now, why is this important? So we've just been talking about exceeding the righteousness of the Pharisees. Exceeding their righteousnesses comes down to watching what you say, because watching what you say leads to all sorts of other actions. And ultimately, you accommodate yourself to the language. So if you go around complaining about other people enough and saying bad things about them, ultimately what Yeshua is saying, You will take action if given the right opportunities based on those words.
You will have what you say.
And that's exactly what we see going on today. It's playing out on a large scale today. Okay. All right, this is the one this is mind blow number 2 coming here. And this for me is now going to become life changing. So Matthew 5:23 and 24. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. So we today we all grew up in modern systematic theology. We like to use this verse for all sorts of applications. Have you ever had someone use this verse on you before?
No.
Well, then allow me to. So,
Sure, Albert, you go right ahead.
Just before we came on today, I was, sitting down on Main Street talking to friends, and I was sharing some of this with them in a real short nugget, and I asked them. I said, "Tell me what this verse means," and they, blah blah blah, and I go, "Yeah, that's the way I always heard it too." Have you ever had anybody use that? Oh yeah, I've had people tell me this. Oh, you need to do this. Okay. So, why is this person going to the altar?
Probably to offer a sin sacrifice.
Okay, so like I always like to say, go back and read the sentence. Okay. What's the
Or
reason
gift.
the sentence says?
Says you're offering a gift.
A gift. Okay, korban. Does it say he's coming there for sin?
Nope.
There's no sin involved in this. Okay. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, right? So you're bringing a mincha offering, a korban. You like God, you're in love with God, God's in love with you, everything's great. And you're like, I just want to go give him another piece of my cattle. This is great. I mean, the day's going really good when it starts. Okay. Does it say, I remember I have done something bad to somebody?
Nope. If your brother is mad at you.
Oh, see, I've always heard that if I have a problem with someone, I need to go fix that problem. That is not what the text says. It
Nope.
says, I remember that someone else thinks I've done something wrong to them. Now, all I did is I showed up to church to worship. Everything's great in my life. There is no sin going on. God is not convicting me of sin. Torah doesn't convict me of sin. I'm having a good, gosh darn blameless day. And I show up to the worship service with my goat, right? Because I love God. So it has nothing to do with my actions. It has to do with the actions of someone else. I may or may not have done anything bad, but they think I have. So I may be perfectly content saying to God, I've not done anything wrong to this guy. I don't even know why he's so upset. Oh God, you know my heart. I did not intend any evil towards him or her. He just misunderstood everything. And because he misunderstood me, he has something against me. But I am blameless before you, oh God. So here I am. I'm going to give you my gift. I'm innocent. And what does Yeshua say?
You have to
Go back and talk to the guy.
Why do I have to go back? Okay. It is the opinion of the other person that carries the weight here. Because you are required to go and make amends with that person, even though you can legitimately say, I didn't do anything wrong. Like literally, y'all could say, Albert, you're justified in this case. I still want you to go talk to them. I recognize the motivations of your heart. You are clean before me. It's his problem. And I still have to go have a conversation. So the question becomes why? So number one, it prevents the other person from coming to worship. Whatever that problem is that he's thinking about stands between him and God wants that thing removed. My unwillingness to make amends with him means that he stands out of right relationship with me and God and the whole community. So when he comes to worship, that is going to stand in between. Secondly, it could lead the other person in the direction we've been discussing here, down a bad path, right? And we don't want that to happen. If he thinks I've offended him, then he is likely to be upset about that, and his feelings will allow him to start speaking that way, and that carries him to the next step and the next step, and it could end up in a really terrible situation for him, and he walks into the church with his gun and shoots 12 people. So Yeshua is saying, it goes back to this very initial thought. That's what I need you to see. But because I claim I'm blameless and I shouldn't have to go to apologize to that guy anyway, because I didn't do anything to him. And then pushes him down the road of the verses that we just looked at. So it affects worship. It affects further obedience. And thirdly, what is most important here to God is that I've lost community. It affects the community at large. This is the money ball I want you to get. Community outweighs the worship service. He came to worship God, and God says there's someone in the community that has broken fellowship with you. I want you to go and repair that first. I'm not saying it's your fault. I know you did not do anything wrong. I know that you are blameless. I know that you are clean before me. I know you brought a sacrifice, and it's a beautiful sacrifice, and it's your offering, and your offering is good. But community, common unity is so important to me. I want you to leave your offering here, go and repair that relationship before you come back and worship me. All right. So I'm going to leave it there as far as the Torah study goes. And then I need, let me shrink this so I can see all of your faces here. Or all of your black screens. Okay, so now I want to bring this home, okay? I believe, being given an opportunity to, I don't know if test is the right word, to walk this out and see what happens in light of this understanding, okay? So there are 2 steps for me to walk this out. So as I mentioned in the last couple of weeks, I spent a week at a local church here watching them go through presbytery, a kind of a prophetic conference, had a great time. Saw a lot of old people I knew from my old church that gave me the left foot of fellowship. And a lot of them wouldn't look me in the eye. A few did, including the pastor. And I have a very unique opportunity, I think. There are many prophecies given about their church and about what's going to happen and these new things that are going to happen there. And I think it's very possible because they may be lesser. I may be greater. I don't know. But I do believe God's calling me to take a sabbatical. So I've been doing this for 12 years. I'm owed 2 sabbaticals. I'm going to ask you guys for 3 months so that I can go walk this out. So phase 1 is I discovered that I still love those people. But whatever their views were of what I did, both going down the Hebraic route and getting divorced, for some of them, that still stands between them and God, because 12 years later, they were not willing to look me in the eye. So the best thing I could do for my friend's church is to fix that. It doesn't matter if it was my fault. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I don't know. I don't care. All I know is that I'm the only person who can go let them loose of what Satan bound them up with. So tonight, I'm going to go back to church. I virtually vowed I would never go back to church.
Never say never.
Never say never, yeah. The first time I went back into church is because I was the one preaching there, and that was in Uganda. So I've got I broke a pretty good, 12-year track record here. And so then God drops me into this. And it starts churning all of this stuff inside of me. So I'm going to go see if he wants to go and have coffee. And there was a unique encounter last week where David was chatting with him. They were praying together in his office. And I became the topic of the day. And he says, so what's up with Albert? Is he a Jew? And so David was telling me this, and I laughed because that's always the first question everybody asks. And I said, would he say that about a Chinese person? Did he become Chinese? Did he become a Croatian? Did he move countries? Would we say anything like this? What's wrong? Let's say I did become a Jew. What's wrong with that? Is there something wrong with that? Right? But more importantly, why didn't he ask me? See, he's actually right on the edge of gossip. And that's where the whole problem came from, was the church talking about me instead of talking to me. Because I only ever had 2 people ever come and talk to me from the church about what happened or about what I was doing. So I have a very unique opportunity, I think, that God is opening a door here for me to help some people with their relationship with God. It's not about me. The light isn't for me. The light is for them. And my hope is that when we go through this process, and that the pastor would be on board with this, is that they would say, wow, why would he do that? Why would he want me to have a better relationship with God when I feel this way about him? He really must love me to do that. That's what I'm hoping will come out of it. If life goes well, my intent is to do the same thing with my daughters. That will be much harder. But after being estranged from them for a dozen years, I now realize I've got to be the adult. Whether it was whatever happened between us is my fault or not, it doesn't matter. It's preventing them from having the best relationship possible with their spouses and with God. And I want the absolute best for my daughters. So that's what I'm going to spend my summer doing. I will send out a little email to you guys with a whole series of YouTube videos for the summer. Many of the sources that I like to go steal from and cheat and give you thoughts that really aren't mine. They're just things I've stolen from other teachers. So I will send links out for the summer for you guys. And then hopefully we will see you guys for the Feast of Trumpets the next time I see you guys. And we will start everything back up. And I'm hoping and praying that I have a really cool testimony for you about how the power of God's word actually works out in our lives today in ways that we maybe didn't understand before. Because it really is not about us. We were not given the light for us. We were not given the light to be a flamethrower. We were given the light to heal other people's relationships, to set them free from the bondages that life gives us. And that's what I hope happens here. So I apologize for all of my tears here. Wasn't expecting that. I'm irrational. I'm never expecting that. So anyway, if there are any questions or anything like that, let me know. I think that's it. So I'm looking forward to an awesome summer. I hope you guys are too. And I wish I could spend it every Sabbath with you guys still, but I'm just confident God has a plan here, and I'm going to step out and just see what happens. We'll go from there. Sound good?
That's the best you can do.
Sounds great, Albert.
That's excellent, Albert. The Lord bless you in that endeavor.
And,
So,
and again, the Lord will bless you guys during the summer. Treat it like a sabbatical also. Don't stop reading the Torah, but engage him. But again, it's not, this was never set up. So let me say this. I absolutely adore doing this with you guys every Sabbath, okay? Otherwise, I would not have done it for 12 years. But the model we're using actually isn't the biblical model. Okay, it's not about me teaching everybody or some pastor. I mean, we're doing the same thing the church did. So I'm just teaching everybody, right? So part of this is also you guys now get to sink or swim for the next 3 months and study on your own some more every Sabbath, right? And learn to do it yourselves. Again, I won't always be here. So you get to do it yourself. And that's a good thing for the edification and the growth of our community also. So, all right, guys, I love you much. We'll see you for the Feast of Trumpets.
See you.
All right, thanks for the warning, Mr. Albert.
We love you too.
Do you,
Thank you.
Or
do you think you could come to
All right, thanks, Albert. You have
We'll-
fun.
It's gonna be awesome.
all of
It
us?
will be.
Bye.
Go with God, Sensei.
Take care.
Bye, Albert.
Oh, just stop the video. You stop the video that way.